This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Today's reading by Alex Foster. Old Christmas by Washington Irving. Chapter 1. Christmas. There is nothing in England that exercises a more delightful spell over my imagination than the lingerings of the holiday customs and rural games of former times. They recall the pictures my fancy used to draw in the May morning of life, when as yet I only knew the world through books, and believed it to be all that poets had painted it, and they bring with them the flavour of those honest days of yore in which, perhaps with equal fallacy, I am apt to think the world was more home-bred, social, and joyous than at present. I regret to say that they are daily growing more and more faint, being gradually worn away by time, but still more obliterated by modern fashion. They resemble those picturesque morsels of Gothic architecture which we see crumbling in various parts of the country, partly dilapidated by the waste of ages, and partly lost in the additions and alterations of latter days. Poetry, however, clings with cherishing fondness about the rural game and holiday revel, from which it has derived so many of its themes, as the ivy winds its rich foliage about the Gothic arch and mouldering tower, gratefully repaying the support by clasping together their tottering remains, and, as it were, embalming them in verdure. Of all the old festivals, however, that of Christmas awakens the strongest and most heartfelt associations. There is a tone of solemn and sacred feeling that blends with our conviviality, and lifts the spirit to a state of hallowed and elevated enjoyment. The services of the church about this season are extremely tender and inspiring. They dwell on the beautiful story of the origin of our faith, and the pastoral scenes that accompanied its announcement. They gradually increase in fervour and pathos during the season of Advent, until they break forth in full jubilee on the morning that brought peace and goodwill to men. I do not know a grander effect of music on the moral feelings than to hear the full choir and the pealing organ performing a Christmas anthem in a cathedral, and filling every part of the vast pile with triumphant harmony. It is a beautiful arrangement also, derived from days of yore, that this festival, which commemorates the announcement of the religion of peace and love, has been made the season for gathering together of family connections, and drawing closer again those bands of kindred hearts which the cares and pleasures and sorrows of the world are continually operating to cast loose, of calling back the children of a family who have launched forth in life, and wandered widely asunder, once more to assemble about the paternal hearth, that rallying place of the affections, there to grow young and loving again among the endearing mementos of childhood. There is something in the very season of the year that gives a charm to the great festivity of Christmas. At other times we derive a great portion of our pleasures from the mere beauties of nature. Our feelings sully forth, and dissipate themselves over the sunny landscape, and we live abroad and everywhere. The song of the bird, the murmur of the stream, the breathing fragrance of spring, the soft voluptuousness of summer, the golden pomp of autumn, earth with its mantle of refreshing green, and heaven with its deep delicious blue and cloudy magnificent, all fill us with mute but exquisite delight, and we revel in the luxury of mere sensation. But in the depth of winter, when nature lies despoiled of every charm and wrapped in her shroud of sheeted snow, we turn for our gratifications to moral sources, the dreariness and desolation of the landscape, the short gloomy days and darksome nights, while they circumscribe our wanderings, shut in our feelings also from rambling abroad, and make us more keenly disposed for the pleasures of the social circle. Our thoughts are more concentrated, our friendly sympathies more aroused. We feel more sensibly the charm of each other's society, and are brought more closely together by dependence on each other for enjoyment. Heart calleth unto heart, and we draw our pleasures from the deep wells of living kindness, which lie in the quiet recesses of our bosoms, and which, when resorted to, furnish forth the pure element of domestic felicity. The pitchy gloom without makes the heart dilate on entering the room filled with the glow and warmth of the evening fire. The ruddy blaze diffuses an artificial summer and sunshine through the room, and lights up each countenance into a kindlier welcome. Where does the honest face of hospitality expand into a broader and more cordial smile? Where is the shy glass of love more sweetly eloquent than by the winter fireside? And as the hollow blast of wintry wind whistles through the hall, claps the distant door, rushes about the casement and rumbles down the chimney. What can be more grateful than that feeling of sober and sheltered security with which we look around upon the comfortable chamber and the scene of domestic hilarity? The English, from the great prevalence of rural habits throughout every class of society, have always been fond of these festivals and holidays which agreeably interrupt the stillness of country life, and they were in former days particularly observant of the religious and social rites of Christmas. It is inspiring to read even the dry details which some antiquarians have given of the quaint humours, the burlesque pageants, the complete abandonment to mirth and good fellowship with which this festival was celebrated. It seemed to throw open every door and unlock every heart. It brought the peasant and the peer together and blended all ranks in one warm, generous flow of joy and kindness. The old halls of castles and manor houses resounded with the harp and the Christmas carol, and their ample boards groaned under the weight of hospitality. Even the poorest cottage welcomed the festive season with green decorations of bay and holly. The cheerful fire glanced its rays through the lattice, inviting the passenger to raise the latch and join the gossip knot huddled round the hearth, beguiling the long evening with legendary jokes and oft-told Christmas tales. One of the least pleasing effects of modern refinement is the havoc it has made among the hearty old holiday customs. It has completely taken off the sharp touchings and spirited reliefs of these embellishments of life, and has worn down society into a more smooth and polished, but certainly a less characteristic surface. Many of the games and ceremonials of Christmas have entirely disappeared, and, like the sherry stack of old Falstaff, are become matters of speculation and dispute amongst commentators. They flourished in times full of spirit and lustihood, when men enjoyed life roughly but heartily and vigorously, times wild and picturesque, which have furnished poetry with its richest materials and the drama with its most attractive variety of characters and manners. The world has become more worldly. There is more of dissipation and less of enjoyment. Pleasure has expanded into a broader but a shallower stream, and has forsaken many of those deep and quiet channels where it flowed sweetly through the calm bosom of domestic life. Society has acquired a more enlightened and elegant tone, but it has lost many of its strong local peculiarities, its home-bred feelings, its honest fireside delights. The traditionary customs of golden-hearted antiquity, its feudal hospitalities and lordly wassailings, have passed away with the baronial castles and stately manor houses in which they were celebrated. They comported with the shadowy hall, the great oaken gallery and the tapestried parlour, but are unfitted to the light, showy saloons and gay drawing-rooms of the modern villa. Shorn, however, as it is of its ancient and festive honours, Christmas is still a period of delightful excitement in England. It is gratifying to see that home feeling completely aroused, which seems to hold so powerful a place in every English bosom. The preparations making on every side for the social board that is again to unite friends and kindred, the presents of good cheer passing and repassing, those tokens of regard and quickeners of kind feelings, the evergreens distributed about houses and churches, emblems of peace and gladness, all these have the most pleasing effect in producing fond associations and kindling benevolent sympathies. Even the sound of the waits, rude as may be their minstrelsy, breaks upon the mid-watches of a winter night with the effect of perfect harmony. As I have been awakened by them in that still and solemn hour when deep sleep falleth upon man, I have listened with a hushed delight, and connecting them with the sacred and joyous occasion, have almost fancied them into another celestial choir, announcing peace and goodwill to mankind. How delightfully the imagination, when wrought upon by these moral influences, turns everything to melody and beauty. The very crowing of the cock, who is sometimes heard in the profound repose of the country, telling the night watches to his feathery dames, was thought by the common people to announce the approach of this sacred festival. Some say that ever against that season comes wherein our Saviour's birth is celebrated. This bird of dawning singeth all night long, and then, they say, no spirit dares stir abroad. The nights are wholesome, then no planets strike, no fairy takes, no witch hath power to charm, so hallowed and so gracious is the time. Amid the general call to happiness, the bustle of the spirits, and the stir of the affections which prevail at this period, what bosom can remain insensible? It is indeed the season of regenerated feeling, the season for kindling not merely the fire of hospitality in the hall, but the genial flame of charity in the heart. The scene of early love again rises green to memory beyond the sterile waste of years, and the idea of home, fraught with the fragrance of home-dwelling joys, reanimates the drooping spirit, as the Arabian breeze will sometimes waft the freshness of the distant fields to the weary pilgrim of the desert. Stranger and sojourner as I am in the land, though for me no social hearth may blaze, no hospitable roof may throw open its doors, nor the warm grasp of friendship welcome me at the threshold, yet I feel the influence of the season beaming into my soul from the happy looks of those around me. Surely happiness is reflective like the light of heaven, and every countenance, bright with smiles and glowing with innocent enjoyment, is a mirror transmitting to others the rays of a supreme and ever-shining benevolence. He who can turn churlishly away from contemplating the felicity of his fellow beings, and sit down darkling and repining in his loneliness, when all around is joyful, may have his moments of strong excitement and selfish gratification, but he wants the genial and social sympathies which constitute the charm of a Merry Christmas. Recorded in Nottingham, England, at 1:30 a.m. on the 25th of October, 2005, by Alex Foster. www.alexfoster.me.uk.
How do you find this book? Any thoughts about the book or the author? Any suggestion for improvement? Please take a moment to share your thoughts in a comment. If you like it, share it with your friends who might enjoy it as well. Subscribe to keep in touch. Visit CompleteAudiobooks.com for more quality content.
At the end of the lane, there was an old, sober-looking servant in livery waiting for them. He was accompanied by a superannuated pointer, and by the redoubtable Random, a little old rat of pony with shaggy mane and long, rusty tail, who stood dozing quietly by the roadside, little dreaming of the bustling times that awaited him. I was pleased to see the fondness with which little fellows leaped back to the old footman and hugged the pointer, who reeled his whole body for joy. The bantam was a great object of interest. All wanted to mount at once, and it was with some difficulty that John arranged that they should ride by turns, and the eldest should ride first. Off they set at last, one on the pony, with the dog bounding and barking before him, and the others holding John's hands, both talking at once, and overpowering him by questions about home and with cool anecdotes. I looked after them with a feeling in which I did not know whether pleasure or melancholy predominated, for I was reminded of those days when, like them, I had neither known care nor sorrow, and a holiday was the summit of earthly felicity. We stopped a few moments afterward to water the horses, and on resuming our route, a turn of the road brought us in sight of a neat country seat. I could just distinguish the forms of a lady and two young girls in the portico, and I saw my little comrades, with Bentham, Carlo, and old John, cruising along the carriage road. I leaned out of the coach window in hopes of witnessing the happy meeting, but a grove of trees shut it from my sight. In the evening we reached the village where I had determined to pass the night. As we drove into the great gateway of the inn, I saw on one side the light of a rousing kitchen fire beaming through a window. I entered, and admired for 100th time that air of convenience, neatness, and broad honest enjoyment, the kitchen of an English inn. It was of spacious dimensions, hung round with copper and tin vessels, highly polished, and decorated here and there with screen. Hams, tongues, and flitches of bacon were suspended from the ceiling. A smoke-stack made its ceaseless clanking beside the fireplace, and a clock ticked in one corner. A well-scoured deal table extended along one side of the kitchen, with cold round of beef and other hearty viands upon it, over which two foaming tankards of ale seemed mounting guard. Travellers of inferior order were preparing to attack the step past, while others sat smoking and gossiping over their ale on two high-backed oaken seats beside a fire. Trim housemaids were hurrying backward and forwards under the directions of a fresh, bustling landlady, but still seizing an occasional moment to exchange a fluent word and have a rallying laugh with a group round the fire. The scene completely realized poor Robin's humble idea of the comforts of midwinter. Now trees their leafy hats do bear to Reverend Winter's silver hair. A handsome hostess, merry host, a pot of ale now, and a toast, tobacco and a good coal fire, are things the season doth require. Poor Robin's Almanac, 1684. I had not been long at the inn when a post-chaise drove out to the door. A young gentleman stepped out, and by the light of the lamps I caught a glimpse of a countenance which I thought I knew. I moved forward to get nearer view, when his eye caught mine. I was not mistaken. It was Frank Bixbridge, a sprightly, good-humoured young fellow, with whom I had once travelled on the continent. Our meeting was extremely cordial, for the countenance of an old fellow-traveller always brings up the recollection of 1,000 pleasant scenes, odd adventures, and excellent books. To discuss all these in a transient interview at an inn was impossible, and finding that I was not pressed for time, and was merely making a tour of observation, he insisted that I should give him a day or two at his father's country seat, to which he was going to pass the holidays, and which lay at a few miles' distance. "It is better than eating a solitary Christmas dinner at an inn," said he. and I can assure you of a hearty welcome in something of the old-fashioned style. His reasoning was cogent, and I must confess the preparation I had seen for universal festivity and social enjoyment had made me feel a little impatient of my loneliness. I closed, therefore, at once with his invitation. The chaise drove up to the door, and in a few moments I was on my way to the family mansion of the Bridges. End of Chapter 2. Recorded on October 24th, 2005, in Oceanside, California.
This is LibriVox recorded. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Today's reading by Christian Quillen. Old Christmas, the Washington Irving. Christmas Eve. St. Francis and St. Benedict, bless this house from way light, from nightmare and goblin, that is hate, good fellow Robin. Keep it from all evil spirits, fairies, weasels, rats, and ferrets, from perfect time to the next rhyme. Alright. It was a brilliant moonlight night, but extremely cold. Our chaise whirled rapidly over the frozen ground. Puss was Sicily, and part of the time his horses were on gallop. He knows where he's going, said my companion, laughing, and is eager to arrive at time for something merriment and good beer of the servants' hall. My father, you must know, is a bigoted devotee of the old school, and prides himself upon keeping up something of the old English hospitality. He is a tolerable specimen of what you will rarely meet with nowadays in purity, the old English country gentleman. For I'm unfortunate that somewhat of the time down, and fashion carried so much into the country, that the strong, rich peculiarities of ancient rural life almost polished away. My father, however, for early years, took honest Eton complete gentleman 1622 for his textbook instead of Desert. He determined in his own mind that there was no condition more truly honourable and enviable than that of a country gentleman on his paternal lands, and therefore passes the whole of his time on his estate. He is a strenuous advocate for the revival of the old world games and holiday observances, and is deeply read in writers ancient and modern, who have treated in the subject. Indeed, his favourite reading is among the authors who flourished at least 2 centuries since, who, he insists, wrote and thought more like true English than any of their successors. He even regrets sometimes that he was not born a few centuries earlier, when England was itself and had peculiar manners and customs. As he lives some distance from the main road, in a rather lonely part of the country without any rival gentry near him, he has the most enviable of all blessings to an Englishman, an opportunity of indulging the bent of his own humour without molestation. Being representative of the oldest family in the neighbourhood, and a great part of the head of being descendants, he is much looked up to, and in general is known simply by the appellation of the Squire, a title which has been accorded to the head of the family since time immemorial. I think it best to give these little hints about him with the old daughter, to prepare you for any little eccentricities that otherwise appear absurd. We had passed for some time along the wall of the park, and at length the chaise stopped at the gate. It was a heavy, ragged, old style of iron bars, and simply brought the top in flourishing and ladders. Huge square columns that supported the gate were surrounded by the family crest. Close adjoining was a border's lodge, sheltered under dark fir trees and mulberry and shrubbery. The post boy rang a large quarter's bell, which resounded through the still frosty air, and was answered by the distant barking of dogs, with which the mansion house seemed garrisoned. An old woman immediately appeared at the gate. As the moonlight fell strongly upon her, I had full view of a little primitive dame, dressed very much in the antique taste, with a neat kerchief and stomacher, and her silver hair peeping from under her hat with no whiteness. She came curtseying forth with many expressions of simple joy at seeing her young master. Her husband, it seems, was at the house with the Christmas Eve in the servants' hall. They could not do without him, as he was the best hand at a song story in the household. My friend proposed we should alight and walk through the hall to a little distance, while the chaise should follow on. Our road now through a noble avenue of trees, among naked benches of which the moon cleared as she rolled through deep vault above the sky. The lawn beyond, sheeted with slight covering snow, which here and there sparkled with the moonbeams of a frothy crystal, and at a distance could be seen a thin transparent vapor stealing out from the low grounds, and the reddening gradually to the landscape. My companion looked on to my passport. How often, said he, have I scampered up this avenue on returning home on school vacations? How often have I pointed at these trees in a boy? I feel a degree of filial reverence for them, as well up to those of childhood. My father was always scrupulous in exacting our holidays, and having us around him on family festivals. He used to direct and superintend our game with the strictness that some parents do studies of their children. He was very particular that we should play the old English game according to their original form. He consulted old books for precedent and authority for every married disorder. Yet I assure you, there never is better to be so delightful. It was the policy of the little gentleman to make his children feel that home is the happiest place in the world, and I value this little feeling as one of the closest gifts parent can bestow. We were interrupted by the clamour of a troop of dogs of all sorts of sizes, mongrel, puppy, whelp, and hound, and curs of a degree, that, disturbed by their young porter's bell and their rattling of chaise, came bounding open mouthed across the lawn. The little dogs and all, pray, let your sweetheart, see, pardon me, cried Bracebridge, laughing. At the sound of his voice, the bark was changed into a yelp of delight, and in a moment he was surrounded and almost overpowered by the caresses of the faithful animals. He had now come full view of the old family mansion, partly thrown in deep shadow, and partly lit up by the cold moonshine. It was ingrained in the building of some magnitude, and seemed to be the architecture of different periods. One wing was evidently very ancient, with heavy stone-shafted bow windows, jutting out and overrun with ivy, from among the foliage of which the small diamond-shaped panes of glass glittered with moonbeams. The rest of the house was in the fresh taste of Charles II's time, having been repaired and altered, my friend told me, by one of his ancestors, who returned to that monarch at the Restoration. The grounds about the house were laid out in the old formal manner, artificial flower beds, shrubberies, raised terraces, and heavy stone balustrades, ornamented with urns, a leaden statue or two, and a jet of water. The old gentleman, I was told, was extremely careful to preserve his solemn finery in all of the original state. He admired the fashion in gardening, it had an air of magnificence, was courtly, noble, and fitted good old family style. The boasted imitation of nature, modern gardening, had sprung up with modern public notions, did not suit a monarchy of government. Its active leveling system could not have violated traditional politics to gardening, dialectics, apprehension, that I'd find the old gentleman rather intolerant to his creed. Frank assured me, however, that it was almost the only instance in which he had ever heard his father meddle with politics, and he believed he got this notion from a member of Parliament who once passed a few weeks with him. The Squire would glad at any argument to defend his duties and moral terraces, which had been occasionally attacked by modern landscape gardeners. As we approached the house, we heard the sound of music, and now and then a burst of laughter from one end of the building. This Bracebridge said must pretty concerned all, when a great deal of revelry was permitted, being encouraged by the Squire throughout 12 days of Christmas, provided everything was uncomfortably changed in usage. Here were kept up the old game of hood and blind, shoe the wild mare, apple, steal away oaf, apple, snapdragon, the Yule log, Christmas candle, regularly burnt, and mistletoe with sweet berries, hung up to imminent hour of all pre-house days. So intent was servants upon their sports, they had to ring repeatedly before we could make ourselves heard. On our arrival being announced, the Squire came out to receive us, accompanied by his 2 eldest sons, one a young officer in the army, home on leave of absence, the other not so neat, just from university. The Squire was a fine, health-looking old gentleman with silver hair curling lightly around open-floored mountains. He went physiognomist with the advantage, like self, of a previous kin or two, which is conversing in the mix of him and benevolence. The family meetings were affectionate. As the evening was far advanced, the squire would not permit us to change our traveling dresses, but ushered us at once to the company, which was assembled in a large old-fashioned hall. It was composed of different branches of numerous family connections, where with the usual portion of old Uncle Nats, comfortable married dames, superannuated spinsters, blooming country cousins, half-fed striplings, and bright-eyed boarding school holdings. They were variously occupied, some at random in the carts, others conversing around the fireplace. At one end of the hall, a group of young folks, some newly grown up, others more tender and budding age, fully engrossed in a merry game. In a profusion of wooden horses, hay trunks, and tattered balls about the floor, showed traces of a troop of little fairy beings, who, having frolicked through a happy day, having carried off to slumber through a peaceful night. While the mutual greetings were going on between Bracebridge and his relatives, I had time to stand the apartment. I followed a hall, for so it had certainly been in old times, and the squire had evidently endeavored to restore it to something of its primitive state. Over the heavy projecting fireplace was suspended a picture of a warrior in armor standing by a white horse, and on the opposite wall hung a helmet, and lance. At one end, an enormous pair of antlers were inserted in the wall, the branches of a slope on which was suspended hats, and spurs, and in the corners of the apartments were fowling pieces, fishing rods, and other sporting implements. The furniture was of the cumbrous workmanship of the former days, though some articles modern convenience had been added, and the oaken floor had been carpeted, so that the whole presented a mixture of parlor and hall. The great head moved from a wide overwhelming fireplace to make way for a fire of wood, in the midst of which was an enormous log, glowing and blazing, and sending forth a vast volume of light heat. This I understood was the Yule log, which the squire was particular in having brought in and limbed on Christmas Eve, the quarantine custom. It was really delightful to see the old squire seated in his hereditary elbow chair by the hospitable fireside of his ancestors, and looking round him like a son of system, being warmth and gladness to every heart. Even the very dog that was stretched at his feet, as he lazily shifted his position and yawned, would look fondly up in his master's face, wag his tail against the floor, and stretch himself again to sleep, confident of kindness and compassion. There is an emanation from the heart in genuine hospitality which cannot be described, but is immediately felt, and puts the stranger at once at his ease. I had not been seated any minutes by the comfortable hearth of the worthy cavalier before I found myself as much at home as if I had been one of the family. Supper was announced shortly after our arrival. It was served up a spacious oak chamber, the panels of which shone with wax, and around which were several family portraits decorated with holly and ivy. Besides the accustomed lights, 2 great wax havers called Christmas candles, wreathed with queens, were placed on a highly polished buffet among the family plate. The table was abundantly spread with substantial fare, but the squire made his supper of fruity, a dish made of cake boiled in malt with rich spices, being a standing dish in old times to Christmas Eve. I was happy for my old friend, Miss Pye, in the brand new of the feast, finding him to be perfectly orthodox, and that I need not be ashamed of my predilection, and greeted him with all the mirth wherewith we usually greet an old and very genteel acquaintance. The mirth of the company was greatly improved by a humorous and eccentric personage, whom Mr. Bracebridge always addressed with the quaint appellation of Master Simon. He was a tight little man, with the air of an errant bachelor. His nose was shaped like a bill of parrot, his face slightly pitted with smallpox, with dry perpetual blue on a frostbitten leaf in autumn. He had an eye of great quickness and vivacity, with drollery and lurking waggery of expression that was irresistible. He was evidently the wit of the family, dealing very much in sly tricks and innuendos to the ladies, and making infinite merriment by harping upon old themes, which, unfortunately, Mayor and the Valley Chronicles did not permit me to enjoy. It seemed to be a great delight during supper, keeping young next to him in continual agony of sniffled laughter, in spite of her awe of the reproving looks of her mother sat opposite. Indeed, he was the only younger part of the company, who laughed at everything he said or did at every turn of his countenance. I could not wonder at it when he must have been myrtle of compliment in their eyes. He could imitate Punch and Judy, make an old woman out of his hand with the assistance of a pork and pocket handkerchief, cut an orange in such a ludicrous caricature, the young folks were ready to die with laughing. I was led briefly to his history by Frank Bracebridge. He was an old bachelor of small independent income, by which careful management was sufficient for all his wants. He revolved through the family system, a vagrant comet in its orbit, sometimes visited one branch, and sometimes another quite remote. This is often the case with gentlemen of extensive connections and small fortunes in England. He had chirping buoyant disposition, always enjoying a pleasant moment, and his frequent change of scene and company prevented his acquiring the sweet unaccommodated habits with which old bachelors are so terribly charged. He was a complete family chronicle, being versed in genealogy, history, and intermarriages of the whole house of Bracebridge, which made him a great favourite with the old folks. He was above all the older ladies and superannuated spinsters, among whom he was habitually considered the young fellow, and he was a master of the eldest only children, so that without a more popular being this very much removed than Mr. Simon Bracebridge. Of late years, he resided almost entirely with the squire, whom he had become a factotum, and whom he particularly delighted by dumping with his humour in respect to old times, and by having a scrap of an old song to suit every occasion. He had presently a specimen of the last mentioned talent, for no sooner was supper removed and slight lines of the beverages peculiar to the season introduced, the Master Simon was called on for a good old Christmas song. He bethought himself for a moment, and then, with startle of the eye, and a voice that was by no means bad, setting an occasionally into a falsetto like the Mississippi, he quavered forth the point company. Now Christmas is come, let us beat up the drum, and call all the neighbours together, and when they appear, let us make them such cheer as will keep out the wind and the weather. The supper had disposed everyone to gaiety, and an old harper was summoned from the service hall, where he had been strumming all the evening, and to all appearance comforting himself with some of the squire's home brew. He was a kind of hanger-on, I was told, to the establishment, and though ostensibly a resident of the village, was often to be fond of squire's kitchen in his own home, the old gentleman being fond of the sound of part and all. The dance, like those dances after supper, was a merry one, some of the older folk joining in, and the squire himself figured out several couples with partner whom he had formed to dance it every Christmas for nearly half a century. Master Simon seemed to be a kind of connecting link between the old times and the new, and to be withal a little antiquated in the taste of his accomplishments, evidently piqued himself in his dancing, and was endeavouring to gain credit by the heel toe, ridden, and other graces of the infant school, but he had luckily assured himself with a little woman girl from boarding school who, by her wild vivacity, kept him continually on stretch, and defeated all his super attempts at elegance, such the ill-assorted matches of which antique gentlemen are unfortunately prone. The young Oxonian, on the contrary, had laid out one of his mean nuns, on whom were paid 1,000 little knaveries with impunity. He was full of practical jokes, and his delight was to tease his aunt and cousins, yet, like all mad happy youngsters, he was a universal favourite among the women. The most interesting couple in the dance was a young officer and ward the squires, a beautiful blushing girl of 17. From several shy glances which I noted in the course of the evening, I suspected there was a little kindness going on between them, and indeed the young soldier was just here to captivate a romantic girl. He was tall, slender, and handsome, and like most young British officers of late years, had taken up very small accomplishments on the continent. He could talk French and Italian, draw landscapes, sing very outwardly, dance divinely, but above all, he had been wounded at Waterloo. What girl of 17, well read in poetry and romance, could resist such a mirror of chivalry and perfection? The moment the dance was over, he got up a guitar and lolling against the old marble fireplace in an attitude which I half inclined to suspect was studied. He began a little friend to have the troubadour. The squire, however, exclaimed against having anything on Christmas Eve but good old English, upon which the young minstrel, casting up his eye for a moment, as if in an effort of memory, struck into another strain, and with a charming air, Gambry, give Eric's night piece to Julia. Her eyes aglow were meant thee, shooting stars at Henby, and else also whose little eyes glow, the sparks of fire befriend thee. No willow wisp slight thee, nor snake or glowworm bite thee, but on thy way, not making stay, since both there is none to affright thee. Then let not the dark thee cumber, what though the moon does slumber, the stars of the night will lend me the light, like tapers clear of that number. Then shall thou let me woo thee, and thus come unto thee, and when I shall meet thy silvery feet, my soul I'll pour into thee. The song might have been intended in compliment there, Julia, for so I found his heart was called. Where it might not. She, however, was certainly unconscious of any such occasion, for she had looked the singer, kept her eyes cast upon the floor. Her face was suffused, it is true, with a beautiful blush, and there was gentle heaving of the bosom, but all that was doubtless caused by the exercise of the dance. Indeed, so great was her indifference, she was amusing herself, plucking to use choice bouquet of hothouse flowers, by the time the song was concluded, the nosegay lay in ruins on the floor. The party now rode up for the night with kind-hearted old custom for shaking hands. As it passed through the hall in the which I chamber, the 9 embers of the old clocks just forth dusky glow. I had not in the scene when the spirit gave Sir abroad. I should have been half tempted to steal from my room at midnight, and peep whether the fairies might not be there and about the hearth. My chamber was an old part of the mansion, the ponderous furniture of which might be fabricated in the days of giants. The room was prim of the cornices of head-carved wood, in which flowers of grotesque faces were strangely intermingled, with a row of black-winged portraits staring mournfully at me from the walls. The bed was of rich, faded damask, with a lofty hester. I stood in it opposite a bow window. I scarcely got into bed, with strange music seemed to break forth in the air just below the window. I listened, and now it proceeded from a band, which I concluded to be the waits of some neighboring village. They went on the house, playing on the windows. I drew aside the curtains to hear the words distinctly. The moonbeams fell through the part of the casement, harshly lighting the antiquated apartment. The sounds that receded became more soft and airy, sung to accord with quiet and moonlight. I listened and listened, it became more and more tender and remote, and as they gradually died away, my head sank upon the pillow, and I fell asleep. End of Christmas Eve. Next, Macmillan, Tokyo, Japan.